We are on to the third question, and that is from Nick, who is with us here.
You have both been able to thrive outside politics and have sort of trumped the idea that there's nothing so X as an ex-MP. You've built careers, and you've also changed a relationship that was one about being diametrically opposed to one that appears to be a really good relationship between the two of you. You see a lot of politicians who find it very hard to make that transition and who are bitter or still focused on battles of the past. Nadine. And I love how you guys have seemed to have moved so far beyond that, and I just wonder how you managed it.
Well, first of all, I think I would be lying to myself and to you, Nick, if I said that there are moments when I really miss politics. You know, I loved it. It was all absorbing. It was very fulfilling. And although it's a bit mad, it nevertheless, you know, gives a huge sort of purpose to your week and your year and your career. But I did make a kind of conscious decision when I left politics, not to be one of those politicians who's sort of endlessly yearning to be back and endlessly kind of angry about what had happened. And I know this is going to sound absolutely ridiculous, and I know I'm inviting a load of ridicule. But I think there are some parallels to, say, someone who's been a football player or a film star who's had their moment. Like,
really?
Well, that's why I said I'm inviting ridicule. But you know,
which particular football star are you comparing yourself to?
I don't know, Gary Neville, some friend like. Now, if you've done a big
England hero, Gary Neville.
Will you hear me out, and then I'll explain. You know, if you've taken a penalty kick in the FA Cup final,
Have you ever done?
No, or have you? If you've been like the star of some big movie, you know, in your 20s, how do you live the rest of your life and not think like, oh, things are, you know, not as good as they once were? And I think you have to consciously say, that was something I loved doing. I'm enormously grateful I got the chance to do, but like, that's the past and I have moved on. And the politicians the ex-politicians who don't do that and are full of kind of bitterness about it or don't find what they subsequently come on to do fulfilling, I think are the ones who you know, get upset.
Look, I agree with everything you just said, and I think the clue is in Nick's question. First of all, when he talks about not being focused on the battles of the past, and if you spend your whole time trying to re-fight the past or remake the past, that's in the end so sapping of energy and morale. And I think both of us in different ways.
Although you did bankrupt the country.
Well, and I think you destroyed our public services through your obsession with austerity. But
we both think Brexit was bonkers.
Yeah, but at the point I lost my seat, I decided, okay, well, I've done that, and I need to move on, and I'm not going to keep looking back the whole time. And I think one of the things I kind of strongly feel is that the things which I did, which have survived and become lasted because they became part of the consensus, and that you took them on. So, you know, if you had ripped up central bank independence, I wouldn't be able to talk about it in the way I do. Michael Gove ripped up what I did on children's policy in education, and I'm still frustrated about that. But then we can both agree on the importance of the national minimum wage and auto-enrollment in the way in which we provide pensions for working people. And I can disagree with you on lots of things, but I don't have to hate you or hate everything that you did. And I think we both decided that wasn't how we wanted to think about policy. If you look at someone like Robert Jenrick at the moment, he's not come out of Parliament, but he lost the leadership election. And so did James Cleverly. And James Cleverly, I think, is, you know, rebuilding and reflecting. I think probably James Cleverly is having thoughtful conversations with lots of people. Robert Jenrick is fighting the leadership election again from within the shadow cabinet, seeking to, let's be honest, oust Kemi Badenoch from within. You know, I just wonder who in the end is having the happier time and who will end up having the bigger influence. I mean, it may be Robert Jenrick, but I wouldn't want to do it the way he's doing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, if James is going to have another run at the leadership, can I just suggest to him, make sure that everyone who wants James to be the leader votes for him?
We're going to take a break, and then we'll be back with some more questions in a moment.
This episode of Political Currency is brought to you by British Airways.
When you're a politician, especially when you work in the Treasury, you're making international trips all the time.
Yeah, that's right. Networking, promoting the work of government, attending international conferences, looking at how other countries are doing things. Travel is such an important part in shaping how you work.
I can remember so clearly our first ever big trip when we came to government in 1997 for the G8 summit in Denver via New York. Full plane of journalists and politicians going out for that summit. After all those years in opposition, it was the first time that we were actually, there on the international stage with Bill Clinton, the US president, kind of shaping the way in which the global economy was going to develop as we look towards the 21st century. I mean, it was very kind of daunting, exciting. But then the following year, the first financial crisis, the LTCM hedge fund crisis began. And in the years after that, I did so many trips, often really short. We used to travel out on British Airways in the morning to Washington, arrive in time for a meeting in the afternoon, dinner, get up the next day, meetings during the morning, and then fly back on the early flight to be back in the office the following day in London. So couldn't do that without a really good airline to fly on.
British Airways was always my go-to airline when I was in government. I remember a memorable trip to Shanghai shortly after I became Chancellor, just a few days after I became Chancellor, actually. And I was straight off to the International Expo, which was being opened there. And Britain had a great pavilion, which was winning lots of awards. And then we went on to the G20 summit in Korea. And, I still use British Airways for a lot of my business trips. Last year, I did a slightly crazy thing. I had to go to New York in 3 times in 1 week. I flew to New York and flew back and flew to New York and flew back all in the same week. It was a bit crazy, but British Airways looked after me all the way. And, that's a pretty routine route, I suspect, for British Airways. But every time you get on the flight, you feel you're special. They're making a real effort. And whether you're going out there and it's the day flight and you have longer to, watch a movie, listen to music, read a book, eat the food, or whether it's just you want to get to sleep, make sure you wake up in London as fresh as you can possibly be. You always get that service from BA, and they're not trying to push you in one direction or another, telling you to go to sleep when you don't want to, or trying to keep you up when you want to go to bed. And that regular trip to New York, I think they do that service really, really well. There's no better place to be in the air. Don't forget, the British Airways will take care of you for a lifetime of journeys. Visit BritishAirways.com to take a look at where we could go next.
We've got one final question from Will.
Thank you very much. Great insights to the questions so far, but I'm going to finish on something a little bit lighter. One of the entertaining things about the podcast I've enjoyed recently is Ed's surprisingly good impression of Gordon Brown when it comes up. And Ed, I was wondering if that's the only impression you've got in the locker. And George, we haven't heard many impressions from yourself on the podcast of old political colleagues.
I was talking to you earlier, Will. You claim you're from Devon, and you certainly don't do a very good impression of coming from Devon with that accent. Yeah, you do a good Gordon Brown, don't you?
Well, I mean, George, I don't know whether it's actually a good impression. I mean, it's the best I can do. I spend a lot of time with him, and so I just try to do my Gordon Brown when I can. Oh,
you're about to see your Blair one. Go on.
Ed, I don't really know if you've ever done a good impression of me. I mean, you've been in the room with me quite a lot, and often we've disagreed. But have you ever? I mean, really? Have you ever agreed with me?
Would you have got rid of clause 4, Ed? Can I show you?
And then,
what about the one?
And then who's this one? I have to say, young Edward. I have to say, young Edward, I'm not totally sure whether doing impressions on this podcast is a wise way for you to go about trying to further your journalistic career.
Oh, gosh.
Peter Mandelson.
Yeah. Oh, I could do a better Peter.
Go on then.
Oh, Ed, I'm very disappointed in you.
That's better.
I thought you would have a great future in the Labour movement, but you've chosen to work with George Osborne, who I once went on holiday with, and it was not good for either of us.
On that yacht. Pasco's yacht.
Anyway, now I'm in a very large building in Washington. I like to call it my home.
Do Peter Mandelson and Donald Trump have a meeting in the Oval Office?
Oh, it's a beautiful meeting, Peter. So good to see you here. Yeah, I like your house, but mine is bigger. I think Rory Bremner could do a lot better. I don't think this is going to be the USP of our podcast.
The only other one I'm going to do, which is while Peter Mandelson and Donald Trump are having the conversation, Gordon Brown in the room is taking notes.
Don't you need one of those big selfie, the Sharpies? Don't you need a big black pen?
He was astonishing. When we used to write speeches with Gordon Brown, we'd sit in a room like this, and there'd be 4 or 5 of us sit around like these guys are here. Gordon would be at his computer, and there would be a screen there, and we would all talk. And you'd say, this is a country united in name only. And he would say, slow down, slow down. And he would type. And then on the screen, we would see what was being typed up there. And that was the speech making process.
But surely it's normally the other way around. Like, shouldn't the Chancellor be speaking and someone else do the typing?
Well, no, but he would say, this is a country united in name only, while he was typing. And then we totally full of spelling mistakes.
I do think, by the way, I used to write my budget speeches myself. I mean, there was a good draft always produced by the Treasury, but I'd sit there by myself with my computer in my study in number 11 and do it over the weekend. And I don't think there's any substitute for writing the big speeches yourself. Doesn't mean you don't get a lot of input and people help you draft things and whatever, but you've got to do the actual drafting yourself.
The thing I would say is, in the cabinet there are no votes, but in the kitchen cabinet, every now and then, I think we should end on a vote. Right. And so, who did the better impressions of politicians, me or George, this morning? If you're voting for George, vote now.
Say aye.
Yeah. And if you're voting for me, I think it's a tie.
It's not excuse me.
It's
not at all. That is not at all the tie. That is a clear win for me.
I think it was a tie. Look, we are going to have to end here because we are so out of time. But we're having such a great time. We could have done another 10 questions. We've come to the end of our first ever live in-person EMQs, a special one because we've had some of our kitchen cabinet in the room with us and also joining us online. And thank you to all of you, but also to everybody else who sends us questions and apply to be on our ballot